I recently watched, all the way through Obsession by, I'm already thinking of his name, Curry Baker. And he's actually someone that I really enjoy because he has he has YouTube shorts and things that you find things that he's done, comedy sketch, sketch comedy. I can't think of the name of the channel or anything like that, but if you look it up, you can find it. And he does a lot of comedy, a lot of horror short films too, and things of that nature. And so I've always followed his work, and so when I found out he made Obsession, I was very excited. And so I finally saw it and everything. And it was really at the point in time when I watched it, it was, my anniversary. So, there was some things there that were, talking to me and things like of that nature. Like something of the shadow and relationships and things like that. But I also started noticing how the movie didn't really line up to a lot of the commentary being made about this character Bear and things. And even Nikki herself, and making her into a complete victim of the situation and, things like that. And it's like, well, of course she, had the wish and everything that forced her, to be like that. But I'm going to get to that. How Nikki, was giving, even, it seemed like mixed signals as well. But of course, that doesn't excuse the almost spiritual grape that happens, if you will, with the wish. But that's the thing. Bear is a personification of this human blind spot that everybody has to feel our own needs so much that we lose the responsibility of who we are and the responsibility we have to others. And I think everybody falls victim of that in some, on some level. And I think that's really the genius of Obsession. I don't think it's so much, the fact that, Bear is some incel or anything like that. I think it's actually very vapid and on the surface of, who Bear is and, what the situation that's going on. Although I do agree a little on these ideas about, Bear being an incel. I just think that calling, Bear an involuntary celibate is, just really misses the mark of what's going on, and the psychology of what's going on. And so basically let's talk about this, Bear character and like what's going on. So there, we start with Bear. He is a guy who is, in his, mid-20s, I want to say. And he works in a music store with friends. Or at least he's made friends with the people he works in the music store with. And one particular character, Nikki, is someone he's like madly infatuated with. And I don't even want to say love, right? Because, whenever we look at, Bear's interaction with Nikki, and his perception of her, you know, it seems like really what he knows about her is very on the surface, like, you know, work chit chat plus, you know, whatever her Instagram feed, you know, is showing at the time, you know? And of course, you know, social media, which I don't want to get too big into that right now, but, you know, social media has its own false layers. Which is going to play a role in what I want to talk about, you know, deeper into this. But Bear becomes a extreme version of this, you know, blind spot that humans have. And he does this by, you know, one day, whenever, you know, Bear's trying to figure out how he wants to tell Nikki how he really feels about her, you know, he talks about wanting to do it at a game night. His friend tells him no. And so, you know, Nikki calls him after Bear finding his cat dead, which, you know, how the cat dies, and other things that you start connecting around what, you know, the situation that Bear is living in, and, you know, what his responsibilities are, or what they should have been, and stuff like that. You can see he's very basically neglectful. You can even see it in his, you know, look. You know, his eyes are, you know, droopy, and, you know, in the characters he has dark rings around his eyes, and his hair is always disheveled, and he basically doesn't look like he hasn't taken a shower in a minute, and what else? Like, you know, his clothes are always like something he just threw on, it seems. And so you can tell that the guy is so neglectful that he's neglectful to himself. And it seems like, you know, like, if you see the way he's been living, and like the, you know, how his cat died and everything, it seems like he was taking care of his grandmother or something. He was a caretaker of somebody that was close to him, and it seems like they died under his watch. You know, that's just like a heavy implication, though. We can't say that for sure whether, you know, Bear was so neglectful that his grandmother died, but it sort of seems like it, especially when you see so many pill bottles laying around, and a lot of it looks like some of the same medicine and stuff like that, and it's like, so who's not giving her the medicine she should be having? You know, and things like that. You know, it's just little things like that you start noticing. Like, Bear is very neglectful. Like, you know, like I said with the medicine thing, the cat dies because the cat eats the you know, the medication. And so one day after work and everything, oh no, is it after work? No. So after he talks to his friend at a diner and stuff, and he's trying to figure out how he's going to talk to Nikki about his feelings, they say, you know, don't do it at game night because, you know, his friend is saying this. Don't do it at game night because I love game night and I want to ruin the vibe. And so when he finds his cat and everything, he doesn't want to go to game night. Nikki calls and everything and says, like, oh, I want to make sure you're there because, like, I'm not going to be working there for very long. Which kind of goes down the gutter because of everything that happens. But anyway, he's like, okay, well, I'll come. And so he decides in his head that he's going to tell her because, like, sooner or later, she's not going to be there, and he won't be able to tell her his feelings. Anyway. So they have game night and everything. He tries to drive her home. But before that, she was telling him on the phone that she had lost her crystal necklace that her mom had given her. And of course, instead of like trying to help her get it or anything like in the drain, like he's like, oh, I'm gonna buy it, and he doesn't really ask her either what crystal it is, because there's like thousands of different kinds of crystals. And so he just goes to a generic magic shop, it seems, and goes to buy her crystal necklace. But he gets diverted from that by seeing, our metaphorical, monkey's paw, which is called the One Witch Willow. He takes that and everything, and that's, when he goes to game night and everything, and, game night happens, tells her, I'm going to drive you home. And they have a conversation. It almost seems like she is telling him, like, you're an inspiration for this romance novel. I mean, not romance novel, but love story I'm writing. But I don't think that's the right, that wasn't the right impression. But that was just my early on impression at first. But this ties into Nikki's behavior, almost like it's like she's a natural flirt, and she's being flirtatious, but also she's not really interested in him, but she knows that he's interested in her, and so she's also doing it to be nice, but she also feels bad at the same time. I don't know, it's a whole situation. So that's another, facet of, human behavior that's being revealed there. But, this whole time, Bear is so meek and mild. He's not revealing his true feelings. Every time she tries to pull it out of him, he, retreats, and he's, scared. He's like, no, I can't tell the truth, And it's just, really, it's this, very childish, boyish mentality of courtship, I would say. And it's like the permanent, child adult man. This permanent boy man. There you go. I think that's a better way of putting it. And so, seeing how neglectful Bear is, and how he's not careful about his duties in life, seeing how he's not careful about, taking care of himself and his hygiene and things of that nature, taking care of his cat, when he finally uses the One Witch Willow, he's very neglectful in his wording. He's very neglectful in the ideas of, does Nikki even want this? What are the implications of what I'm doing here? When I force someone to love me or to be obsessed with me, what does that mean? And things like that. And it's strange, right? Because, you kind of wonder, where does Bear get this lack of a sense of accountability? Where does he get this lack of sense of responsibility, for his actions? And, and why is he so timid about taking those leaps of faith, even at the severity of rejection, for the sake of, being rejected, and running away from these things. And, you see this attitude a lot in a lot of young men nowadays. But it's not just young men either. It's young women too. Because for everything that young women say, that, they want to be, she bosses and, take over the corporate world and things of that nature, you see a lot of them, have these, backup plans for, becoming a mother. Like trying to freeze eggs and, freeze, specific sperm donors that they'll, like, and things like that, And a lot of times they fail in those endeavors. And it's like they want the motherhood, something that they aspire to, like so badly, but they don't want the responsibility of being with a man who's trying to figure himself out and trying to become, as they are. These are, hard things to balance and juggle with. And, the thing is that we're all doing that with each other. You know what I mean? It's just, in this movie, it's showing it from that aspect. And it's kind of interesting how Nikki is kind of the symbol, too, of a female who has, like, rejected her agency for the sake of making someone else feel better, but only because they realize, their own, negative intentions. Because, like, a lot of females are more aware like that. They, they have that, that social understanding, like, with a community, like, how things work, how people's emotions work. They're very, like, society-based beings, And so, in that way, that's where you start touching on toxic empathy, where you start letting in, like, all these, people into your nation and things like that. And, that's what I'm saying, like, these people are playing off these certain ideas that are happening in our culture now that I think is just, like, so impressively profound. Like, I haven't even fully wrapped my head around it because I just watched this movie once. And the senseless violence we even see today is a part of that. Like, if you see Bear as a personification trying to meet your needs in a very crazy and radical way for the, that lives within all of us, then you start to realize, like, what all these people are trying to do that create massive violence. They have a very narrow way of thinking. They're thinking very short term. They're using violence to pursue what it is they think they need. And this is the same thing that Bear is doing, because he doesn't really know Nikki. And, really Nikki doesn't know Bear either. I mean, it's so funny too, because people are so sympathetic of Nikki. But again, she, like, does these things, like, where she puts herself in a position, doesn't want it, does want it, hot and cold. And I know that, like I said, that's very different than the whole like magical, enforcement of will upon another. But you can see that Nikki uses things too to get her way. And like I said, like with the whole thing, like her saying that she's gonna leave work, so she might not be there long. I think her saying her father has cancer is a dramatization of that. And that's another thing that highlights how Bear doesn't really know Nikki. Because he doesn't realize, like, Nikki and her father don't really have a close relationship. So it goes the revealing of that thing. But again, it always goes back to that question, like, why is Bear like that? And like I said, this is a common thing that's happening to a lot of young men now. And I think it's it's generational trauma combined with cultural trauma and cultural shock, which causes its own trauma and traumatic feedback loops. And then combine that with the instant gratification of our age, you get this like altered emotional intelligence. And, combine that with COVID, whenever kids weren't able to socialize, and how the socialization age has reduced down to people interacting on the internet, mostly. To get their kids to get the most fun they can get without spending large amounts of money. Now, this isn't to say either it's not even happening outside myself. Because, like I said, I see that I see pieces of myself in Nikki. I see pieces of myself in Bear. And I think, I know that a lot of things that differentiate these, things from myself and, some of the people in their generations and how they're reacting to these situations. And it's because of awareness, being aware of who you are, being close to the spiritual world, trying to become as pneumatic as possible, and being in Congress with the Father, however one may interpret that or whatever, because I know not many people are Christian or Gnostic mystics. But that's the thing. This ties into how I talk about the end of the Hylic age and the Feral age. How that these things are going to burn themselves out. And the people that'll be left standing, it'll just be such a great disparity. It really will. But we can't allow something that might seem inevitable to get us to a point to where we don't try to work towards something greater. And that's why I, do what I do with the MON, the Mystical Order of the Nazarene and the Holy Reintegrated Church. It's to basically help people understand that one of the most radical moves you can make nowadays is to basically say no to consumption. Is to recognize that sometimes it's okay to say no to desire. For the sake of knowing who we truly are and making sure that we're being responsible to ourselves, to our neighbors, to our community, and everyone we love, and everyone we say we love, and holding ourselves accountable to that standard of showing that we do love them. Ultimately, Bear is trying to see himself better if he has Nikki. And so, in that way, you have to realize that it's never anybody else but God and, the powers and the forces and the principles that God, sets forth that is going to set us free. Not anybody else, but ourselves and our connection with all that. And yeah, that's all I really got to say about that. I'm probably going to watch the movie again. I really thought that was interesting. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
There is an answer. There is a way.
Gnostic.